Cool. Thanks, James. Okay, so the aim of today's panel is we've got some of the four, I think, some of the top game designers in VR, and I've been working in this space for a couple of years now. And it's a really good chance for me, I think, for everyone as well. So at the end, we'll answer a couple of questions from the audience to sort of pick their brains and find out sort of where VR is going and how it can help sort of us and other developers make better games. So to introduce the panel to start with, on the right, we have Steph Keegan. She's from Pixel Ripped. She was the co-founder and producer there, and you've been there for almost 2 years, is that right? And I think last year we had Pixel Ripped 1989 that came out. No? This year is coming out, cool. And we're also expecting 1979 and 1984 to come out this year, which is one of the sort of the first big Oculus games that was coming out last year. The next we have Tom Beardsmore from CodeSync. He's the co-founder and CEO of CodeSync. In the last 6 years, Tom's worked on titles for PlayStation 3, 4, the Vita, the Wii U, the PC, and he's recently been working on games with Oculus Studio for the Samsung Gear VR and the Oculus Rift. Those games are Esper and Esper 2, and he's also working on bringing Gang Beasts in VR as well at the moment. Next to Tom, we have Paul Coles, who is the co-founder and creative director of Fierce Kaiju. Paul's got over 15 years experience in the games industry, previous working for Rockstar on games such as Grand Theft Auto 5, Red Dead Redemption, and they currently had their first VR game release, which was Viral, which is available on the Gear VR and the Oculus? Or just the Gear? Some point, yeah. Okay, cool. And next to Paul, we have Katie Good. So Katie is the co-founder and creative director of Triangular Pixels. She's been in the industry for about 3 years now. And about?
No, 7 years.
7 years. I think as long as I've been in VR, Katie's been around as well. And yeah, she's probably one of the sort of the pioneers pushing VR game design. Some of her titles have included Smash Hit Plunder, which is going to be coming out for the Gear VR, and also Unseen Diplomacy for the HTC Vive, which is one of my sort of personal favorite games as well for the Vive. Cool, so thanks again for everyone joining us. So I thought we should start the first question to get a bit of an overview of sort of what we should expect from VR games to come. So the games industry has sort of been around for a while now, and there's a lot of established mechanics and ways that people are used to playing games. And I think since television, this is now the first format where you've actually had to change the way that people look at games in day to day. There's a quote from the head of the Sony CEO, from Andrew House, and he says, "The most fascinating thing is how VR has rewritten the rulebook of what game design should be, and it's leveled the playing fields in terms of production value." So Katie, as your nearest. So my first question is, so how do you go about getting gamers to sort of unlearn established mechanics? And what should players expect from VR that will be different from sort of games on other platforms you've seen in the past?
So I guess our example, really clear example of this is in Unseen Diplomacy, where we get players to undo a screw using a screwdriver. And what we noticed with the gamers was they would pick up the screwdriver, they don't know how to do that, and then they'll just waggle the screwdriver in the screw, sort of expecting it to work. So part of that was just making it really obvious when you were actually undoing it in a certain direction, that it was actually undoing really loud sound, like amplified sound for how loud that screw was unturning. So we actually found that non-gamers play Unseen Diplomacy better than gamers. Otherwise, we've made sure, like when people are walking around, that we actually strip out controls that we're not going to tempt them with. So we actually tried showing Smash It Plunder a while ago using like traditional movement controls, and all the gamers would use the stick. And I was like, stop using the stick, stop using the stick. So we actually disabled it entirely, which isn't necessarily a positive thing, but at least it got around that immediate issue. So it's just making sure that, I guess, it's living up to expectations of real life rather than necessarily just games. So when we're designing things, we're looking at how it works in real life instead. And that should give you like a decent enough base to which gamers and non-gamers hopefully be able to use a tool or like a piece of like game mechanic or something.
Cool. Thanks for that. I think it's interesting as well, where I think game mechanics have almost been getting more and more precise, and sort of more smaller movements have been going on. But now with the Vive and everything, it's about getting people just to be more real and have to do more natural motions that maybe they're not expected to do. So Paul, you've worked for quite a long time in the games industry now. What's like the main difference, do you think, between sort of like the old style game, or that just like typical normal games that are being produced, and the VR stuff that we're seeing now?
Well, there's just so many differences. There really is. You know, like going through some of the stuff that you mentioned that I've worked on previously, most of the big key things from those titles, specifically the ones that are very story-driven, like the GTAs and the Red Dead Redemptions and the Call of Duties of this world, a lot of the big hitting elements of those titles just won't work in VR. You know, the sort of scripted sequences where you get blown out of a window, or the simple things of like carjacking somebody and then getting into the car and then driving off in it. That sequence in VR would just make you hurl. So we've got to rethink all of those sort of situations, really. And, you know, there's ways around those things, but we have to totally rethink how we do those things, really.
Yeah.
I think that's. I think we can still do those type of experiences, but we've got to think about how we do them. And you know, like you could do a Call of Duty type game, but it wouldn't work in the way. Well, I don't think it would work very well in the way that it traditionally has. And yeah, we've just got to find new ways to do that stuff if people want those games.
Because I think one of the questions we get a lot definitely is when people hear about VR and they don't really know much about it is, oh, when are we going to be able to play Call of Duty, or when are we going to be able to play Grand Theft Auto 5 and those things? And do you think that there's going to be potentially a crossover between those kind of sort of AAA games in VR coming out, or that we're going to see something that's sort of completely different?
No, I think it's a fair sort of assumption that we're going to see those types of licenses come along eventually. But I don't think they'll, personally, I don't think that they'll exist in the way that they have previously. They'll probably have that brand and that association and that vibe and the ethos of that world, whatever it is.
Yep.
But I hope that the games are very different and much more exciting. And that's no disrespect to those games. I just, you know, there's so much that can be done with those experiences. You know, those licenses, so that IP and stuff. And I think it'll happen. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. And so Tom, you've got a lot of experience sort of in previous platforms and making things. How do you change your approach to game design and what you're making for things like Esper and Esper 2 compared to sort of like the typical console and platform games?
I think you've obviously got to design from the ground up with VR in mind. Also be super iterative with what you're doing, and always be willing to, like, don't stick to a design document, sort of just, we've been making things up as we go along, really. And to be honest, we did that to an extent with previous games as well, but it's, in my experience, better that way. You end up with a better final product if you're willing to bend what you started on. Yeah, the other thing is, like, I think what you were saying, Katie, about it kind of fitting in with the real world more, VR. VR lends itself more easily to being to intuitive control schemes in that respect, because if people think, oh, maybe it will work if I do this, it makes more sense, especially to sort of gamers or non-gamers of older generations. VR makes more sense to them in some cases than it would otherwise, yeah. So, yeah, I think the main thing, though, is really just being super iterative. I know Manesh was maybe talking about that earlier with their game Land's End.
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing.
Cool. And I think with, thanks Tom, and this is Steph. So you've been working on Pixel Ripped for a while now, and with Pixel Ripped you're playing a game inside a game, right? So how did you come about sort of with that idea, and what was like the thinking behind the process of designing a game like that?
It really did start out with the fact that my co-founder Anna is a huge gamer like myself, and she wanted to celebrate the 80s, as I'm from most people in this room, are very fond of. And I have to agree, like, the game wouldn't be what it is now if we hadn't playtested and playtested and playtested, and listening to seeing how people respond, and then working to that. So it's been really interesting, and I just can't stress how much importance playtesting has been for us. To seeing, because you may have a mechanic you think you've nailed, and then you give it to 20 people and only one of them gets it, and suddenly you're like, that's not working.
Yeah.
And there are things that you forget you can't do anymore. So UI interfaces with health bars up in the top right corner no longer work because that's the corner of your eye. Or for different languages, you can't suddenly just use subtitles in people's faces because it's really frustrating. So you have to really start thinking about how you're going to take it out there commercially across the world when you suddenly can't just stick subtitles. It's quite interesting.
Cool, and it's interesting. So a lot of people about playtest, sort of about testing and getting things working. I know when we're sort of testing games at the moment, I think I've played in so much VR now that I just can't get motion sickness now. I can for some bits of it, but like a lot of it, I just don't even notice, where I know a lot of other people will. So I guess one of the things that I've noticed with the Oculus store is, so for the Gear VR and the Rift, each of those, they have comfort ratings with each game. So those go from comfortable, moderate, and intense on both the stores. So at the moment, Valve hasn't included anything for the Vive store for anything on comfort ratings. But my question is, I think, do you feel that comfort ratings are required for each game for VR? And if so, why? So you want to go back to...
Yeah.
Do you want to
So I feel like with Steam, at least, the fact that you can get a refund really, really helps, because then you can give it a go yourself. And I feel like that's super important. Like, people get quite sick in different ways, actually. Like, some people, it's just how fast things are going past their eyesight, and it's like their eye twitching that's causing them to feel like discomfort. And then most people, it seems to be that mismatch of G-forces and compared to real life. So having a rating is super useful, but like me and my partner, like, we get different ways of getting ill. So like, if something just says moderate, it helps, and it might put my partner off, but I'll be like, I'll give it a go and see how I feel. So I feel like, yeah, like, I really actually wish that the Oculus store would offer refunds, I guess. Like, it's a bit rubbish to us as developers. You go, oh yes, I've got X amount of money, and then you see it sort of go suddenly a little bit. But that's good. That means people are actually finding experiences that are comfortable to them and for them. And in part, it's like education as well for the end users. When they start realizing what can make them feel uncomfortable, like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable when I'm flying around in jets, like going loop-the-loops. Okay, I'll probably stay away from airplane games or games where I'm a bird. So in part of education of that. So yes, the ratings are cool, but there's other things that can be done.
Cool, thanks. And Paul, so you've already got a game on the Samsung Gear VR release, don't you? So what rating does that get? Is that just
I think it's comfortable for most, I think.
comfortable for most? Okay.
Yeah. Or some. No, some. I'd have to check.
So if you say you released a game on the Samsung Gear VR store and you got an intense rating for your game, do you think that would be something you'd know about beforehand, or it become a bit? So what action would you take if you released a game and you found out that it was intense?
I think I very much expect and hope that if people are putting a game in and it gets an intense rating, they're probably expecting it.
Yeah.
Because you kind of know, and there's enough information out there now to understand what is going to be like an intense experience. You get some incredible things like Radial G, for example, which is super fast, and you can understand why that might have a slightly higher rating in that respect, but it's an amazing experience, and I particularly love that game, right? So it's, I think the responsibility lies in how we package our VR titles and how we put those forward to people. So just take like a roller coaster game for an example, right? It's, people in the real world that don't really like roller coasters kind of need to understand that this is a roller coaster title that they're going to look at, right? And I think that there's a responsibility on the developers and maybe the platform holders to ensure that that kind of happens to a degree. I'm not sure what form that should take, but the comfort rating is at least part of that. But I think we could probably go a bit further with it too. That's where my head's at.
So what further would you take it? What do you think?
I think it's more about just how you're putting the game forward. Like, if it's a scary title, for example, if people are particularly prone to getting scared shitless to horror titles, then it's you kind of need people to know that it's a horror title, right? So and that should come across in the sort of images that you use in your marketing and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's where the importance should lie, like on your title screens, on your screenshots in the store, all that sort of stuff needs to kind of tell exactly, as best it can, the experience that you're going to get in that game.
Cool. And so Tom, so you've released Esper and Esper 2 now?
Yeah.
So when you're designing those games, how much the sort of motion sickness does it come into play when you're designing it? And yeah, that's it.
It was really important to us to have it be really comfortable. I think that was partly our decision, but also working with studios. They really wanted comfortable experiences, primarily. I guess it's just a safer bet, really. So yeah, we designed completely for that, and we will continue to do that going forward as best we possibly can. I think with Gang Beasts it's a little bit harder because that game is obviously it's not really a separate experience. It's just Gang Beasts in VR. It's just kind of like every aspect of that game just been designed for the hell of it. Yeah. And it's just somehow worked out okay. But yeah, with Esper we definitely definitely designed for it. It was very important. So yeah, it was either it just sort of stuck in a single position or teleporting. Yeah.
And how, I mean, I think one of the big things for games now, I think the biggest difference for me, from what I noticed from sort of the AAA console titles, is that freedom of movement. So if I'm playing sort of Grand Theft Auto, Uncharted, or anything like that, I'm able to really run around and explore my environment.
Yeah.
Whereas I'd say typically for most Oculus titles or Samsung Gear VR titles, you're sort of restricted to maybe a specific area. How do you sort of go about dealing with that sort of movement problem? And
yeah. I think there are definitely ways of doing it. I think Chronos does like a really good job of it, but you're still stuck in a certain area.
Yeah.
I think there would be ways of doing it with a third-person camera as well. Like I would really love to try and do like a Witcher-style game in VR, and allow yourself to look around and and have the proper 360 sound, because that's as important as anything in VR. The sound has to be absolutely top-notch. So yeah, I could imagine something like that being really immersive. But yeah, I think that's how you'd have to approach it at the moment. I think in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, we'll look back and laugh at everything that is happening right now. Like, how is this even an issue? And probably laugh at everything that's been made now as well. But yeah, I think that would be my ideal solution for that kind of thing at the moment. Yeah, third person.
I think, Katie, you smash it thunder. I was about to say you've do you think you sort of solved them? How did you come about designing the movement system in that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that we're doing. So the first one that we found was, so it's all about pathfinding in the game, because in the Gear VR you've only basically got the one button. So you look to where you want to go to and you travel there, and originally we just showed you where you were heading, and we noticed that if people were standing up whenever they went to go somewhere, they sort of leant backwards as they started moving. So then we knew, oh, there's definitely something wrong there. So then we made it feel like that the world was moving rather than they were moving by adding these static cubes that traveled with the player, sort of like flying dust in the air. And they always stayed relative to the player. So if they rotated, they could just sort of stuck to you, basically. So we actually noticed when people started moving forward then, they didn't lean back. So then we knew, oh, so therefore their body isn't expecting that they're moving forwards. Then there's like a couple other things. There's like our blink mode. So we saw that there was lots of research going into when you're rotating around and you're snapping turns, if you actually do that positionally as well, so that when someone's walking forward, you're basically teleporting them in little tiny steps to go somewhere, rather than just a straight teleport. Because personally, I hate teleports so much, I rip off the helmet. I find them that jarring. So like, step in them. And then also for the people that get like optical discomfort, we make it look like they're blinking. So we actually like darken the whole area and show just the footprints to where they're going to go to. And so when they go along, all they see is these footprints underneath them changing. And then when they open their visual eyes, then they actually see the world again. So that's all the ones in Smash It Plunder. And then the most ridiculous one, which requires all the space, is Unseen Diplomacy, where in the 4 meter by 3 meter area, we do a form of redirected walking. So there's no actual locomotion method whatsoever. The players are literally walking themselves around this massive lair by us loading in and out of rooms in a non-Euclidean space. And I think that's ultimately that's like only one solution. But all the ones that we really like doing is still allowing players to explore wherever they want and also whenever they want. So not just cheating by going somewhere, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. And so Steph, with Pixel Ripped, then you're mainly sort of stationary for each level, is that right? So with that, what sort of challenges did that sort of present without being able to sort of move as a character around, and how do you sort of approach it?
Well, at Pixel Rip, we don't actually see not being able to move as a problem.
Okay.
We see it as just a new way to look at making a game. So we decided that we do have cutscenes. So you are in a classroom. You do now go out to playtime, and you do also go to Headmaster's office. So there are new locations, but we think of it more like you got to the end of the level, cutscene, now you're in the playground. But I think a good, fun environment and an excellent storyline and great acting and animation, you don't need to take a player on a journey. The great stuff can happen around you. So we've added a weapon, so there's a spitball mechanic, and you can shoot the planets and Pluto will fall down, because it was the 80s and Pluto was a planet. And then you can instigate mini games with the spitball. We have kind of like a duck hunt homage, where you have to shoot pigeons. But also, the game within a game helps us get around that as well. So you also have an 8-bit platformer just sitting there. So it's kind of a bit of a cheat, but we do have that going on as much as everything else around you. So I think like really good environments, really good stories, you just actually could create fun games around, because all that matters is it's fun and immersive. That's how I feel.
Cool, thanks. And I think as well, so with Paul, so with your previous experience, so with like Grand Theft Auto and a sort of Red Dead Redemption, those games arguably are more extreme and maybe, I think someone's made Grand Theft Auto 5, or they've done a quick demo in VR with the Vive controllers, and they say the act of actually shooting someone and then watching them pull out the car and then walking up to them and then holding up your arm and pulling the trigger is actually a lot more daunting and dark in VR than it would be. And with a lot of the games that are coming out now, they're sort of very safe for players, and I don't think there's anything in there that's going to be sort of too traumatizing to anyone. How do you, as a developer, how do you sort of deal with players' sort of well-being? And do you think, for me as a gamer, I sort of do want the most extreme kind of games, and I want to be sort of playing those things and seeing what's sort of pushing my limits. But yes, how do you deal with players' well-being? And where do you would you draw that line?
Again, I think this comes down to the messaging of what you're putting out there. You take those games and undoubtedly they're going to feel much more intense in VR, no question about it. And, going up to somebody and shooting them in the face, it's not a nice thing, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that we've just got a responsibility to say what these things are. I think these things are going to come. We need to be prepared for when that happens. There needs to be a decent rating system. People need to understand what they're getting into. Does it feel more daunting in VR? Yes, it does. And I think that time is going to tell how we all sort of adapt to those things. I think it's like any new tech that comes along. It feels much more vibrant and intense when it first comes along. It's like when PlayStation 1 came out and all those, or everything went 3D, and it was just much more visceral for everybody. We had a similar conversation back then, and I think over time we'll kind of get desensitized to some of that stuff. I'm not saying that's right or wrong.
Yeah.
But, inevitably that kind of thing happens, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's an easy solution to that question.
We could maybe have like VR confessional or
totally,
VR therapy sessions afterwards.
Maybe tie that into achievements somehow, or D achievements. Yeah.
You never know when someone's afraid of the colour yellow. Just random phobias which, you just don't really appreciate. In fact, when we're in the National Video Game Arcade showing Unseen Diplomacy as like a permanent little VR exhibit there, and they realised after the first half a day, they printed out a warning sign saying, "Warning, this game contains heights and small spaces," because they had a player going, "Oh my god, this is too high," and then get worried about the kit. It's the messaging saying, yeah, there's spiders in here, crabs, butterflies. My mom was deadly afraid of butterflies. If she saw VR butterflies all around her, she would hate it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? It's the messaging of what content's in there. At least if it's like a GTA type thing and it's a whole world, you can run away from the butterflies. So
yeah, just close your eyes in VR as well, I think. And it's very. I think the point of desensitization is a bit on one, because I think when cinema first came out and everyone was watching a train running towards them, everyone was there carrying out the way, and we definitely see that almost exact reaction in VR there, and where people do just think everything is real. Even in the Vive, and there's someone big tall stood in front of me and it's all dark and daunting, it is a bit terrifying.
Yeah, totally. You look at, I'm sure most people in this room might have played PT, the pre-Silent Hill game that Kojima did before everything went weird. That was, that was scary as hell just on a normal sort of screen. So imagine having that experience in VR. I'd cry. I'd sit in a corner and cry. So there's definitely got to be. It comes back to that messaging thing I said earlier. It's we've got to let people know what's in these games. Simple as that, I think.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to direct at anyone in the panel at all?
Come on.
No? Nothing? Okay, no worries. We've got some more questions. It's okay. So one of the questions I want to ask, keeping on this sort of topic, is how do you deal with death in virtual reality? So when you've got a sort of that end state of game, typically in games now, when you die, you lose. How do you? So if we start, say with Katie, how would you deal with death?
Well, personally, in our games, we've actually stayed away from it. So in Unseen Diplomacy, when you get zapped by a laser, we don't blow up your head or anything. We just we tint the screen so it's a bit uncomfortable for a bit, and then you learn not to do it again because there's a slight discomfort. We don't get you to fall off ledges when there are heights because that would be horrific. But the best game I've seen for death, which I was just like, I saw it and went, oh, that's amazing and genius, was in Eve Valkyrie, when you get shot in that craft. They don't explode the craft and they don't make you go flying. They just slowly freeze you in the outside of space. And it's like, that makes entire sense from a physics perspective, which I'm happy about. But then also, like, it slowly darkens the screen. So, no, it's like, it's uncomfortable in the sense that you feel like you're frozen up. Good, don't get shot again. But then it's not like, as in, pukey discomfort or anything.
Yeah. Cool. And Tom, do we have much death in Esper or Esper 2? Have we got any death in games we can look forward to coming later?
In the new thing, yeah, in the new one we're doing, yeah, but not like the current ones.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it just, like, we're all about getting people back into the game as soon as possible, both in VR and outside, so it's just a very quick sort of reboot. Yeah.
Cool. And Steph, do you have anything to add?
We just have detention, which in some ways is worse than death. But no one dies in Pixel Ripped, no.
Cool, do you have time for one more? Yeah? Cool. Okay. So I think one of the things is when you're playing games now in virtual reality, the first thing people do is they look down at their hands or they look at their character and think, right, this is me. And if you don't see your hands or you don't see your arms or your body, you think people go, oh, this is a bit weird. I don't see myself. When you're sort of creating games, how do you sort of go about developing a player's identity? So if you look down with their sex, gender, sort of race, when you're designing games for things for lots of people of different races, how would you go about? Steph, how would you go about sort of like designing that? And with Pixel Ripped, have you always just got one? Are you playing a specific character, or are you playing yourself?
Yeah, we've actually broken a lot of the rules because most people would say don't have a body. But we were really keen to, because you play as Nicola, who throughout all the different generations of gaming that she plays. So we were really keen to give her a body, which comes with many technical issues in itself. One, if the camera relocates, suddenly you've got this headless girl sitting there. It's freaky. And then you've got people twisting, so you've got to figure out a good way for when they lean, she leans, but also that she's still controlling it. It's very complicated, and we've got a very good programmer who's fixed a lot of those bugs. But we thought it was important. So with her, she's got a school skirt, and it does freak people out when they have legs that aren't their own. One thing I have noticed is, obviously you have control of the hands to some extent to play the game, but sometimes her legs wobble, and I notice that people playing do the same thing, and they kind of are led by her actions, which is kind of cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We actually did some tests on a prototype we were doing, and we had sort of, when head tracking first came along with DK2 and stuff, it was like we put, obviously kind of like you had the body there, and it was, you kind of got walked from this sort of spaceship interior, and then you ended up being on a beach. And then as you look down, you're in a bikini, but as you moved your head, the rig would kind of move with you, so it felt like the body was properly connected, and it was a really cool experience. It felt genuinely like I was attached to that person, and I think that I don't think that it's going to matter, to be honest, what sex and race or whatever your character is. I think you'll accept whatever story is being told. I think that's how that's going to fly.
And I really like the way it's done in Esper, because the way the chair moves with you and slows down, it feels so good. That was the first thing I noticed about the way you did it. It's really great.
Cool. Thank you.
So I actually, I get uncomfortable when I'm not in my own body. It's really weird. And especially with all the early demos, when I look down, and most of the time, of course, there was no breasts because you assume you're a guy. That's just it's really off-putting. so in Smash It Plunder, we just had hands, and even then we allowed players to customize the hands to all the sort of various colors of natural human skin, as well as like red, like vibrant pink, green, blue, whoever they wanted to be. And so it just felt like when they got to choose, they're sort of a bit more accepting of the fact they were in there and allowed themselves to just be within inside there. I was thinking about like in Unseen Diplomacy, we're actually quite lucky in the sense that the style of wand controllers rather than Oculus Touch means that just fit tools. Yeah. And so actually just having this tool rather than having to like customize hands and stuff is so much easier. So you don't have to really worry about it as much anymore. But then you have to start thinking about like, oh, what does that player look like if you're going to have them on a TV screen or if they're going to be on a projector? So in Unseen Diplomacy, we can have people sort of networked in, and you can see, like from CCTV camera, the Vive player running around. And so we had this really obscure blue floating head. So, and just the controllers. And just that was enough to be able to show all the movement and everything without having to actually suppose that the player happens to be female, male, etc. Because I personally can't get on with being forced into a character. I just find it really alienating for some reason.
So just give them like a generic body.
Well, not even like a generic body. They're just no body.
Just no body.
It's floating tools and this like floating holographic head. And it's exactly, I think they do it in the Oculus Touch multiplayer demo.
Okay.
So yeah, I feel like that's the way forward that we would want to carry it, and I would never want to assume who the player is or force them to be anything they don't want to be. There's a game coming out where the developer said, oh, it's going to be amazing. Your wife is going to come up and she's going to kiss you and hug you and you're going to feel this connection with her. And I was like, my wife? Like, no, thank you. So again, an assumption that you're a straight male or, like maybe you are female lesbian, but either way, I would find that uncomfortable and that she's invading my personal space.
Cool. And I guess to finish off then, so Tom, you probably went the complete opposite direction to what Katie did with Unseen Diplomacy. Would you say what led you down that sort of thought process or that creative decision to have a body?
The body. Yeah. We actually tried to have a body originally. We tried to have both a male and a female body. And the main reason we took it out, initially at least, was because it would just kill the phone on top of everything else. Yeah, because we were trying to really, with Esper, we really pushed the S6 to its limit pretty much while maintaining 60 FPS. So yeah, it was just too much. And really, I don't think we wanted it in there, but I think studios did for some reason. Yeah, but then I think they've changed it because obviously they're learning at the same time. Really, it's since we've been working with them, they've been learning from all the projects they're working on as well. So yeah,
London studio did the same. Like I remember them showing them the Deep ages ago. It had this floating human body underwater in like wetsuit, so it's pretty obvious that you're a guy. And then they changed it to gloves because they felt like they couldn't get it right as well. Because trying to do arm IK and try to get the elbows exactly right. When it's working, it's great, but when your elbow goes over here, that's not good.
Cool. Well, Steph, Tom, Paul, and Katie, thanks a lot for your time, and thanks everyone for joining. And I hope you have a good rest of the day.